There are other fascinating stories about the Camp Logan era, the 370th Infantry of African American soldiers who were sent to France but actually not allowed to fight with the American armies, so the French army took them in as soldiers, many of them winning the Croix de Guerre, the French award for bravery in the face of battle. So there are many, many layers to this place that go beyond just the architectural structure of Camp Logan. Here's the map of Camp Logan. And there's stories about human beings. There's stories about people whose lives evolved and developed in this place. And in a way, they are our ancestors in our own involvement in this place. So this sort of summary slide of this era, this 50-year era, we see the redevelopment of the land once again as flat, open, a few scattered trees, extensive ditches for drainage of Camp Logan, interesting letters from soldiers talking about it being 6 inches of dust and concern for when it might rain. This is a soldier arriving at the camp and saying this place will really be a mess when it rains. So now I want to address a little bit of what was going on in the rest of the world and how that started to influence Houston and Memorial Park. This gentleman, the previous gentleman was John Claudius Loudon, and he was an advocate for parks and designing parks in London during the Industrial Revolution, which was the first moment of people realizing that we had to invest in parks for people's health, mental and physical. He then influenced the next gentleman, A.J. Downing, who really brought the European parks movement to the United States in the 19th century and was formative, next slide, in the influence of Frederick Law Olmsted and the practice of building parks. The plan on the screen is Central Park in New York City, built in the 1860s. That really spawned a whole movement in urban parks across the United States in a rapidly urbanizing nation. As early as, and I'm going to read this quote, as early as 1866, an article in the First Houston City Directory noted, quote, "Our city needs adornment, our people to be treated not merely as money-making machines, but as social, moral, and intellectual creatures. Now is the time for suitable location for public squares, places of resort for people, where something can be seen to relieve the monotony of the brick walls and crowded, busy highways. Provisions for the cultivation of a taste for the beautiful and city improvements have entered largely into the municipal legislation of all the large cities in the world. Now is the time for Houston." At the same time, a mania for exotic plants explodes across the United States. Thanks to the connectivity of Houston to the rest of the world, it's very easy to ship plants from South America, Asia, and Europe. As the nursery trade expanded, a gentleman named Edward Tease introduced the Chinese tallow to Houston. And boy, did it take off. Also, a Japanese-American nurseryman named Saburo Ami imported a new plant from Asia, the waxleaf ligustra. So we have privet and tallow as two great introductions coming in actually through Houston. And so, again, for good or bad, our relationship of manipulation of the land continues. Another curious development is happening in England. The ancient game of golf becomes popularized by Queen Victoria when she builds a golf course at Balmoral Castle. The next slide shows how in the late 19th century, even the technology of golf influenced the rapid construction of golf courses. A Southeast Asian tree called the Gutta percha created a sap that became the ideal golf ball. That's an early proto-golf ball. And it led to the popularization of golf in many cities around the world. By the 1890s, golf was accepted as a US sophisticated sport and pursuit for American recreation. Sporting golf clubs sprang up around many cities, New York, Chicago, Yonkers, and Newport. and Houston. Another curious development, in the next slide, and you're seeing on this map where all these influences are coming. This is all showing the connectivity of Houston to the rest of the world. It really has been a global city since the 19th century. So Bermuda grass comes to Houston, and at first it was attempted to be used as a bedding plant for livestock. It grew too fast, too furiously to be controlled. Its use was then somewhat abandoned. And then in the 1890s, next slide, the English lawnmower was introduced to Houston, and that really allowed Bermuda grass to become the grass of choice for lawns and golf courses. So we've introduced yet another powerful plant into the palette here. So what I've tried to demonstrate is that the influences of city planning, park design, golf, recreation, and the accessibility of foreign plants began to influence the planning of Memorial Park, as is shown in the Hare and Hare plan that was commissioned in the 1920s. So we'll take one more leap, 1970. This is another very interesting period for Houston. It's the beginning of the Cold War. And Houston, the United States and Russia begin an arms race. The next slide is the first picture ever taken from space in 1946 by the American V-2 rockets that were launched from Las Cruces in New Mexico. In 1961, the space exploration program is located to Houston and puts Houston really at the forefront of the leading technologies of space exploration. Next slide. In 1968, this photograph was taken and entitled Earthrise. And for many people, this was the beginning of a whole new awareness of the fragility of our planet, the beauty of our planet, and perhaps even the beginnings of the environmental movement. Another interesting character of the 70s is Arthur Lydiard, who popularized the sport of jogging. And we were thinking, running is such an important part of Memorial Park that we had to look into the history of running as well. He was a New Zealander, and in the very influential in popularizing jogging. But for the United States, it was really a University of Oregon track coach named Bill Bowerman who wrote the book Jogging in 1966. Next slide. So that's a big influence. And the next slide shows the Houston Marathon. So that book came out in 1966, and by 1970, people were routinely jogging the perimeter of Memorial Park Golf Course, and the first Houston Marathon was held in Memorial Park by the mid-1970s. So once again, Houston was at the forefront. The next slide is our last imagined section showing the constant evolution of the park. Back at Memorial Park site in 1970, the golf course was now fully constructed. Numerous invasive plants such as Chinese tallow and waxleaf privet are likely present on the site. The Houston Arboretum and Nature Center, a product of growing interest in environmental education, was built by 1964, and numerous joggers used the site for their daily constitutionals. Also during this time, a regeneration of forest occurs on the site, and that is no longer actively cut for lumber. So as we look ahead to 2020, this is my final slide, we want to take into account all of these different effects and impacts from culture, history, horticulture, design, military history, and just remember that this site is so rich and layered with meaning. It is not, in fact, a pristine wilderness that has never been touched by mankind, but rather has been a highly manipulated place for thousands of years. So the mandate now for us is to be the best possible stewards of these stories of history and the ecology of this place in service to the public of Houston. So thank you very much.
We're going to turn up the lights and actually bring forward some experts that NBW is working.
The first person I'd like to introduce is Susan Turner. who is a landscape architect and landscape architectural historian, preservationist, and she is working with us on the aspects of the cultural landscape. Susan's been working for 20 years as the landscape architectural consultant for Bayou Bend, so she knows this neighborhood and Houston very, very well, and is a great friend. I also wanted to call up Louis Albach. Louis, where's Louis? There he is. We had a wonderful tour this morning, walking through the ruins of Camp Logan, looking at the old, number of old buildings and structures and trying to understand the way the current remains match with the old historic maps. Jaime Gonzalez, a prairie ecologist, who's working at the Katy Prairie Preserve, is coming up. Susie Alford, Susie was sitting in the back, who is a forest and park ecologist, working with us on multiple aspects of the different webs of natural ecologies, soils, plants, and wildlife. And Nicholas Butler, who works for Memorial Park Conservancy, is an arborist and ecologist, and in charge of director of ecology for the Conservancy. Is that right? Conservation, sorry.
We have nice microphones so everybody can be heard. There'll be some sharing of microphones. We thought we got some feedback from people as this is our third round of public meetings. So we got feedback that people wanted to have more of an opportunity to converse with the Memorial Park Conservancy officials as well as the people who are working on the project. So we are asking that you please, some of you already have, we're asking that you please write questions on cards. Suzanne is walking around collecting the basket. We have a few here. And we're going to just start a little bit of a conversation that's going to continue on with you in a few minutes. I'd like to start this just kind of conversation with a question to Thomas and Susan, Susan particularly. This presentation sheet seems to present a limited view of the site's history with plants and transport. How is the team addressing other aspects of the site history not covered here? And you can hold the microphone close.
I'm not used to sitting on stools in front of people.
You do it very well.
Yeah, well. In any case, today's my first day on the project, and the reason I'm in Houston is because we wanted to sit down with the people who really know Houston's history best, and that's what we spent the best part of today doing. The history of Houston is long and complex, and even though I've looked at it from a lot of different angles, I am no expert on Houston. And Houston has a very interesting horticultural history, and that's the part that I've looked at for the longest time. And it's a part that I hope somebody will look at in enough depth to write a good book on, but that's not Memorial Park's issue today. What we're doing is trying to put together a program for all of the aspects that need to be looked at, everything that relates to Memorial Park's use and potential use, and then decide where the best information lies. So that's part of the reason for these public meetings, so that those of you who know people in the community who have something that they can bring to us will do so. The presentation tonight could have picked any aspect of cultural use. Transportation just happened to be something that seemed logical, since it's pretty much transformed Houston's history. But it could have been anything. I don't know if that answers, but Thomas is going to continue.
Well, I think we've assembled in our workshops a team of local historians and experts who are doing exactly that, trying to fill in any blanks or any missing pieces And that's, we invite any of you who this might have triggered a thought or something that you know about of the history of this place that you think should be taken into account. Again, our goal is to tell as many stories with this design as possible. And then as designers, really balance the interface of human use, history, and ecology. Because I think as the Wilderness Park of Houston, there is such a powerful presence of wildlife and plant life, and it is that oasis in the city, but not at the expense of erasing the cultural traces of other things that have come.
I think the sad thing to me is that most people would use a landscape like Memorial Park and not even be conscious of the fact that it had a history before being a park. And so our real hope is to be able to plant within the design enough cues so that people begin to experience it as more than just a place to recreate. And in so doing, they start to look at all landscapes as having that kind of rich content. And then they'll start to take better care of even the landscapes that seem ordinary to them.
This is a question that's just come to me. You talk about cultural clues or cues. How can you give some examples of ways that this might be expressed or have been expressed in other places?
Let's come back to that
We
question.
can come back as if anyone else also wants. I have some questions that people have also asked, so I can do that too.
Well, I think any archaeological artifact that's exposed is a cue. That's an obvious answer. And I think the obvious way to tell the story is through signage, And if you go to a national park site, there are those kinds of things that are more than cues. They're like hitting you in the face with a story. And I think we're also used to being taught that way, that we're almost numb to it, and particularly the younger generation, I don't think they even care about learning that way anymore. Or at least that's my experience with my daughter, whom I've tried to drag through many places like that, and don't try anymore. So, I think it needs to be more experiential, and that's the challenge to designers today, is how to use something in the landscape to engage a user, and then to get that person's curiosity so inspired that they begin to sort of put the story together themselves.
Thank you. This question is actually for Nick. With such a motley mixture of nature and culture in the history of Memorial Park, how do you choose what to emphasize and what to reject?
That's a good question. That's kind of why we're doing the process. That's the way I look at it. One of the things I've learned along the way is if I were to try to limit all the decisions I'm making to my life experience, we would not be having fun. So if I can include some of the comments and desires maybe that you guys have, and then again we've got the technical panel or the experts that are chiming in on things. It kind of makes me look a lot smarter because I don't have to do all the thinking on my own. So I hope that answers the question.
I think so. This is a question and a comment, so I'll read the comment because it provides context. What is really needed is real restoration of nature, tree planting, restoring actual facilities, not more construction. Is the master plan focusing on this? I know that was, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That is one of the goals of the master plan, is to rebuild what we see as some fairly broken ecologies. And I think my presentation was really trying to reveal to you that the situation that is there is not a pristine condition. And so what we want to do is look to, with our team of ecological experts, is look to the most resilient, native ecologies of Texas? What are the true Texan ecologies that have a resiliency, have a strength, that could survive future droughts, that could survive the extremes of climate that we're seeing more and more? And maybe, Susie, would you like to address some of that from your experience?
I think what I should explain is what we're doing now is we'll actually start in the next few months collecting data that is baseline data so that we know where we're starting from. We also have historical data that we will compare that to so that we know where we were, and then that'll give us a baseline to start our plan. And then we'll come back to everyone that's in this room as well as our panel of experts that we met with earlier today and review that information.
Sure. First of all, it's really wonderful to see so many friends here. There's a lot of people who've given their heart and soul to this place and nature, so I'd like to acknowledge those folks being here. You know, one thing we were talking at the Ecotech panel today about, you know, what is the fidelity of the ecological base that we have to what was here before, and what is the proper balance between usage and what nature needs in order to thrive and survive. And I think, you know, your presentation really pointed out the fact that at each stage along the way that people did manipulate the system for what their current needs are. And I can't think of a higher or better need right now for the people of Houston than to have more green space to mitigate the stress of modern life. And I think that's a very modern usage in terms of the sustainability going into a repeated drought cycle. We've seen this in Texas over and over again. I think that there are a cluster of ecologies that work well, whether it's a grassland, forest mix, savanna mix. You know, when the drought hit, you know, everybody was very concerned about the forest, and they would call me up and say, how's the prairie doing in this drought? And I said, it's doing fine. Our trees are not doing very well. So not arguing that there's going to be grassland everywhere. I think it has a part. I think obviously the trees have a wonderful part, but I think that there are also some things that we can do to mitigate our impact on the land in terms of wildlife that won't take away from any of the facilities that the humans enjoy here. So I think it's building in resiliency also means looking at smarter ways to get what we need to get out of the park as well.
And all of the layers.
Yes.
Yeah. To go on, that has multiple layers.
Yes.
This is, when we start talking about baseline, Thomas mentioned soils, there's vegetation, there's multiple layers of vegetation. We talked about fireflies today. It's water quality, it's cultural, it's layer upon layer upon layer that we'll start building the baseline of, and then that'll be how we start the plan.
Excuse me, panelists, big favor. Can you all, I know this microphone, try and speak a little louder. There's some folks in the back having a hard time hearing.
And like that. Susie, not just to Susie, but to the panel, the history conversation that we're having right now, this question really pertains to that. Many humans have had influence on the land of Memorial Park. What was Ima Hogg and her brothers' desired use of the park when they sold it to the city of Houston? Now, I'm going to ask that we give a succinct one, but I think everybody can, if you want.
Let's start.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't seen that documentation.
Well, I'll just make one quick comment, and it's surprising that many people, to see their reaction, when I asked them, do they know why it's called Memorial Park? You get some strange answers, but the short answer is that the Hogg family was very involved in trying to set up a memorial for the soldiers who trained here at Camp Logan, and hence it was established as a memorial to those soldiers. And I think that's the short answer to that question.
That's a perfect answer.
And it's only supposed to be a park. It's not supposed to ever be anything else. It's only supposed to be a park, not anything else. That was one of the objectives.
Now, are there legal, is there some sort of a legal contract that back
if the park ever becomes anything other than a park, it will revert back to not the descendants, but there you go. There you have it.
And two other organizations.
And I have a quick addition. This mic works much too well. I got you. Well, anyway, I think what I love about the Hogs and Memorial Park is that they clearly inherited from their dad, Jim Hogg, this love of the land. And when you try to look, when I look at the difference between Louisiana and Texas, which I do all the time, you know, Louisianians take care of well, they don't take care of anything, but they love the water. And Texans really love their land. And I think this idea of planting trees was deep-rooted in the Hogg family from their childhood. I'm a Hogg was obviously into gardens, and if you read the early letters, all three of them really collaborated in talking about what kind of a place they would live in as they planned Bayou Bend. So I think that's the larger legacy of their idea about the landscape.
I might also add that Mike Hogg, by the way, served in France in the U.S. Army, and so he had a very personal connection to the war and the soldiers.
That's a good segue into this question. Camp Logan is a huge part of Memorial Park and Houston's history. What will be done to honor those soldiers and preserve what remnants of it are left?
I hope they don't ask me, because I might take up all of the money.
Well, I'll attempt to address. We have not begun designing anything. We have a 4-month public process of meetings like this, history, research, getting to know this panel and what they bring to the process. Today was a fantastic visit with Louis, looking at the ruins of many different buildings. I mean, there are in pretty good condition physical traces of Camp Logan, and to honor those, to preserve those, and to find ways to reinterpret that layer of history for the public. That, again, we have not started designing anything. There is no plan. But there are things starting to bubble up in the heads of our design team. And one of those might be the idea of a history itinerary, that you could walk a trail that might take you through the different remains of a historic site. And then as I started thinking about that, I started to wonder, what if there's also an environmental trail that could take you through the different habitats to understand the difference between the riverside ecologies and the upland prairies, or just the different kinds of plants and animals that you might find here. And what if every now and then those two trails intersected, and you had a moment to talk about this idea of culture and nature together? I mean, I think it could start to be the interesting bones of an interpretation. So, long way to answer. We think that the traces, the physical traces of Camp Logan are an incredibly important manifestation of this history of this landscape, and deserve to be honored.
Great, thank you, Thomas. With this push for, and I promise you this says exactly what I'm reading aloud, with this push for reforestation, will there be room for Gulf Coast prairie, Jaime's specialty?
Well, one thing I want to touch upon that other folks have said that I think is worth bearing in mind is that, you know, I think the Hogg family really did have a love of nature and really wanted to see nature perpetuated. Their vision of conservation obviously has evolved since that time. So I think that with Buffalo Bayou Park and the re-envisioning of Memorial Park, we've learned a lot of things since that time. And what you're seeing all over the city with Bayou Greenways and Buffalo Bayou Park and this and the Arboretum Master Plan is doing right by nature is not just planting trees anymore. It's about planning for the future. It's about ecological complexity. It's about preparing for lots of different kinds of wildlife. And in the context of that, that's first of all very exciting, because that's how you really, I think, will get to a maximization of utilization of this park by wildlife. I also think that in terms of historical markers, there's, you know, when I plant a prairie, in this case, I'm not planting just flowers and grasses, I'm planting a storybook which my students and my guests will read together. So in a certain way, I'm also doing it a remembrance. It's not memorializing dead soldiers. What it's doing is it's remembering and honoring the memory of the cattle ranching families of this area who built Houston, who helped build Houston, and the Native Americans who came before it. So the actual grassland has a dual function. It definitely will increase wildlife viewing possibilities in the park, but it also is taking what sometimes is a short history community and taking it further back in time, all the way, frankly, back to the time of those Columbia mammoths that were here. So I think that hopefully there'll be a spot here for some grasslands. We don't know how many or where they'll be or anything like that, but part of, I think, the wonderful job that they're doing so far is to really allowing the soil, what happened in the drought, and other factors to kind of guide them in a more enlightened view instead of just going out and springing out thousands of plants that might die in the next drought. So I'm very excited about how seriously they're taking it and the collection of experts that they've put together.
We have one more question for this time for the panel, but don't worry, because the conversation is going to continue several times and then at the end again. This question is, as a child, I played in the park in areas that are now too filled with invasives to enter. How do you propose to keep those spaces open, therefore allowing more use of the park?
You've been doing, you trained expert there for months now, right?
That is, I feel like that question was intended to get me in trouble. If you have land, you're probably going to want to manage it. I mean, and it's not a one-shot type of deal. So, with regard to invasives, they're always going to be here. The effects of urbanization and population growth, and you guys saw the slideshow. So there's always going to be things coming into the park that may, from a vegetation standpoint, and even from animals as well, that maybe you might not want here. So we have to monitor it and manage it and probably be a little bit more innovative. I mean, as things have changed, the perspective, I think, of the public is changing. I can imagine, I was sitting in the back, and I've had so many people ask me, what are you going to do about all the trees dying, right? And I've answered, right, that same voice. And I was imagining how many people were surprised or in disbelief that Memorial Park actually wasn't a pristine wilderness. Because people come to me as though it actually is. And so management, I think, is, and I don't want to use management as this blanket term, like it's them, like them, management. But that's the way we have to deal with invasives. And it's an ongoing process. I wish I could make it sound like it's a silver bullet, but it's not.
For the uninitiated, could you define invasive?
You did good.
Some of the things that you noticed on the slides are the invasives that we'll have to manage for. The privet that came in, the Chinese tallow. I'm certain there's probably some other things we haven't even identified out there yet. KR blue stem is a little grass that likes to take over everything. And as Nicholas said, management is not a silver bullet. It's very labor intensive. How we actually do it, we don't know yet because we don't know exactly what all is out there and where. And to the extent it may require actually Nicholas going out there some more and with shears, with a little bit of herbicide. We talked about, I hate to use this word, but we actually talked about controlled burns, but we won't do that. Only because it's I know, go on the website. Jaime likes burns too, but it's only because it's a great management tool from an ecology standpoint. It's a wonderful tool. We know that we may not be able to use that here That's also part of the plan that we'll be putting together and analyzing over the next several months. Invasives also are wild hogs. They don't happen very often, but we do believe that they're probably there. Coyotes. There are probably some other species we haven't identified yet.
Wait a minute. Nope. That was the third question from the floor. We don't allow those. We want you to please put them on your cards, please, and we will take them up and we will ask the question. Okay?
Just real quickly, to get closer to your point, an invasive can either be native or exotic. So that has nothing to do with whether it's exotic or native. It has everything to do with its ability to grow in an uncontrolled fashion and crowd out other things that we want to be there. So we do have some native invasive shrubs that will thicketize, getting back to this question over here, an area. Yaupon hollies, laurel cherry, there are a number of species that will do that. So it's more about the growth characteristic and how crazy it goes on the landscape and whether it crowds out other things. Yeah, resiliency for you guys who might not know that term is something that's very topical right now in terms of landscape management. It's basically trying to rebuild and reconstruct ecosystems to take the vagaries of future projected climate change, weather pattern disruption. Some places they're planning for more rain and more heavy rains, and some places they're drying out. And so basically we're trying to get to a point where with proper planning and management and adaptive management that can respond pretty quickly, what you can have is a landscape that won't collapse like it did in this last drought, where you get 80 to 90% mortality in some areas, and then you have all these invasives coming in. We want to try as best we can. We know we don't know a lot of things in the mix that has a greater ability to self-heal and to not meet with these kind of catastrophic events.
I actually just learned a new word from Jaime, thicketize. So you will hear me using that in my everyday conversation. We thank you for your questions, and please do continue to write the questions on the card. We're continuing to collect them, and at the end we'll have another 30-minute segment where we'll bring these experts back to the floor, plus Shelley Arnold, who is the Executive Director of the Memorial Park Conservancy, to answer more questions. You see we got an empty stool waiting just for Shelley. Right now, our experts are going to come down and join your tables, because now we want the conversation to continue with you. On your table, you see that you have a legal pad, you have note cards, and Priya's going to set up 3 questions that we would love for you to talk through with your table. We need you to decide who's going to be your table recorder with a C and a reporter with a P. So that means that each table, if we have enough time, essentially we're balancing time between question time and or report back time. So we'll see how the crowd feels when the time comes. But the 3 questions that we would love for you to talk through are, we're gonna lower the lights so you can see them. Where have you felt most connected to people, nature, and or culture? If you remember, that's the topic of Thomas and Suzanne's talk. Where have you felt most connected to people, nature, and or culture, even if not at Memorial Park? Where? The next question is, how do you feel most connected to Memorial Park? And then the final question is a segue onto that one. What aspects of Memorial Park would you like to feel more connected to? So these are the 3 questions we would love for you all to talk through with your group. You'll have about 20 minutes. So at 15 minutes, I'm going to come out, we're going to come around and gently remind you, you've got 5 more minutes. And we will do either each table report backs or some spot report backs to make sure we have enough time for the more questions from the experts and to Shelley Arnold, okay?
Okay,
So this is a vote, gonna go very, very fast. Your choice is 1, 5 report backs, and then we have more time for questions, or everybody can report back, and whatever time is remaining, we have questions. So the first vote is, you're voting for 5 report backs and a longer time to ask questions. Raise your hand. Okay. Nice representation, generally. Second question is everybody report back and whatever time is left. Smaller number, first group wins. Okay, everybody, we're gonna do 5 tables. This table where Jaime is sitting, this middle table, the table in the back with the gentleman raising his hand, the table with, oh, they have said no. This table? They have said yes. That's 4, and the 5th will be a toss-up. Okay, looks good. You were the first ones to say go, so there you are. Okay, I'm gonna give you one microphone here.
All right, the answer to the first question for everybody here was sadly not Memorial Park. Some of the great parks of the West came up, great natural parks, the Grand Canyon, the national the historical parks of New Mexico. So we were asking ourselves, why would we think of those rather than Memorial Park? And the answer is, well, there's some great natural beauty, there's some great culture, and sort of what that leads us to, I think, and maybe that's the purpose of this question, is how can we make Memorial Park more like those other parks so that we would want to answer our question, that's our favorite park. And I think what you were discussing here about bringing in the cultural and historical parts of the park might be a way to do that. I really did like the thought of bringing in Camp Logan and talking about how the prairie has been developed into the various woodlands and such. And so I guess our table sort of felt, well, that's a good idea, and maybe that will make us come here next time and say Memorial Park is our most influential park on us. Question number 2 is easy. We're all runners. That's how we connect to the park. And we didn't get the question number 3.
Oh, I've got one. I have to be careful. I raised 2 little boys so I can make myself heard without any problem. We had, on the first question, we had 2 votes for Big Bend Under the Stars, a vote for ABNC, and a mention of the Big Thicket, Columbia Bottomlands, Sam Houston National Forest, and a Boy Scout park in the hill country sleeping under the stars, all Texans. How do you feel most connected to Memorial Park? There were 2 votes for canoeing, 2 votes for walking in the Arboretum, and 1 that said both. What aspect would you like to feel more connected to the park in? 1 was to the prairie, to giving the prairie a little bit more attention and nurturing. Natural areas that are currently orphans, not in the Arboretum and no trails to them. And an increased access to the bayou, connection to the area west of 610, which I didn't even know existed. Cultural trails intersecting the natural trails, again, we thought that was a good idea as well. More hiking trails connected to each other, and the last one that came out last was a sound barrier to 610.
Okay, our table had a number of outdoor enthusiasts, including birders and paddlers. So when we came up with where we felt most connected, a couple of us came up with the Pecos River. And out in the Pecos River, you're out in nature, and you can find ancient pictographs and things that you can look at to connect you with various cultures and with people. And we also said, people who didn't say the Pecos said rivers and streams generally. And so we all feel very connected to the water. Where we feel most connected in Memorial Park, the woods and the bayous. I mean, the habitat and the water are very important to this table, and we also think that it's a great place one of the few places in Houston to see some real topography. So that's important. And as far as the third question, things we'd like to see more connected to, we have one member at this table whose father actually served in World War I and commanded a unit of infantry in France. And so there's a connection that he would like to see with Camp Logan. And everyone felt that would like to see more connection to local history and also to the ecological history as was presented in the presentation tonight. And everyone felt that they would like to see enhanced access to, enhanced habitat and access to the bayou. So those are what we thought.
Okay. So our table got off track pretty quick, but we generally stuck with how do you feel connected to Memorial Park? And the general overall theme was the running trails and the natural state of the park and the aspects of the park that everyone here probably enjoys, whatever that might be. Everyone's very passionate about what they spend the most time doing. And what aspects of the park would you like to feel more connected to? Generally along the same trends. It's the natural pieces of the park. It's the running trails. It's serving the needs of the people that use the park today and making sure that those needs are still met going forward. A couple of little things that we thought of: speed limit on Memorial, slowing that down so that people running along Memorial feel a bit more safe. Some sort of sound barrier against I-10 so that you feel more in a park setting and you don't hear the cars rushing down I-10 anymore. So those were a couple little aspects. But predominantly it's what we love about the park today and ensuring that that is maintained going forward.
Okay, and we just sort of free associated. Where have you felt most connected to people, nature, or culture? Certainly our national parks. We said on several occasions Buffalo Bayou, even riding horses near Buffalo Bayou. Deep East Texas woods, where there were no people. New Mexico, under the skies. And we were also felt connected to people, nature, or culture, where trails and buildings were at a minimum. How do you feel most connected to the park? Certainly the waterway, Buffalo Bayou. I think for the most part everyone agreed that the Arboretum was green, it was beautiful, a great place where you can connect to children and present educational. It was a great educational tool. And then also, this was a very hungry table. We all agreed that friends coming together to enjoy the park in various ways, including Beck's Prime. What aspects of the park would you like to feel more connected to? And all of us felt like we needed to go, we needed to consider nature with nature trails, certainly an awareness of nature and the memories that it brought back of childhood. The water, Buffalo Bayou, and learning how it functions and how it works and what educational opportunities would the bayou presented, such as studying erosion. And then we also felt there should definitely be a connection between nature and culture, and this was a great opportunity to marry different aspects of human history with natural history. And then we were also thinking that just being here, being involved in the master plan was a great way, and the master plan and its future was a great way to also to be connected to Memorial Park.
Thank you, thank you. That was fantastic, and I will congratulate everyone who presented. You were very succinct, and I think we really got some great input. I'm going to ask all of the panelists to come back to the front of the room to take your seat on the stool. We've got some great questions for you, and I believe that I did request a person from Houston Parks and Rec to come, so I think there's a toss-up between two people who could go if they wanted, or they could say no. We've gotten quite a few questions, and I'm going to just begin with I'm going to begin with a question around the connectivity. This was asked in many different ways. Will the master plan address connectivity with other Houston area parks, including Buffalo Bayou Park, and the different things that are happening there?
Hello, it's working. That is certainly our desire. That's been expressed throughout the Houston community as an objective that we should have, and as part of the design process, we'll be exploring how to do that. The real question is how to do that. And we've heard also, we're in discussions with the Parks Board on this as well, and this would be something the Parks Board helps take up. The TERS is interested in the connectivity to Uptown, and so how could we do that? Safer connectivity to Uptown than we have today. But we certainly should hook into the 150-mile Bio Greenways initiative, and now we have the potential through the utility corridor to hook running north-south as well. I think that's north-south. But the idea would be yes, don't know how.
Is it likely we will be as free-thinking and constructive as was done with New York's Central Park, i.e. transformational? It's a toss-up.
You want to go ahead? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Houston stands at a 100-year moment. It's a kind of century moment for the city of Houston, and I keep thinking about this point, and I've said it a couple of times, that there's a remarkable moment right now where Houston has commissioned 5 or 6 of the nation's leading landscape architecture firms to re-envision and design world-class parks for this city, and I think we're at the dawning of an era when the nation will look at Houston as the city of parks, not just a city of petroleum or asphalt or any of the other misconceptions that people have. But when you start to look at the work that Olin did at Herman Park and SWA at Buffalo Bayou and Design Workshop and Reed Hildebrand at the Arboretum, and our work hopefully soon at Memorial Park, it's starting to really feel like a parks system rather than a city that has a few green islands. And so the more that we can make an effort to link all of these parks together so that the people of Houston and the public think of it as a parks network or a system, then we start operating like an ecological system does, across boundaries and in an interconnected and resilient way.
Can I touch on that real quick? Because I think that there's a lot of ways that this could be truly transformational, not just from what do you put where and who gets to use the park and all those things, but anybody who's lived in Houston for a long time knows that we don't do the best job of rooting people in place. Some counties like Fort Bend County are made up of 48% people who were not from here. We have a huge global community, and that people want connectedness. And I think if we have a strong interpretive program that uses the native ecology and our cultural history and reinvent the way we do that, we can help root people at a time where they feel very transient and disconnected. And if we do that, that will be revolutionary for Houston, accepting and valuing our history and our culture and where we came from as a people. That needs to be defined, and we can use this process to help do that.
Following on that question, Houstonians are very interested in introducing children to the outdoors, both for health reasons and to introduce them to the city's culture. What do you all see as opportunities for engaging Houston's next generation at Memorial Park?
Actually, Jaime, you focus on this a lot in your work. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Sure. So I have the distinct pleasure of serving on the Texas Children and Nature Steering Committee. We're trying to get more kids outside with a very broad coalition around the state. There's one inescapable fact. The average child today, every day, gets 7 minutes outside of unstructured time. That does not code well for guardians for the future of any of our natural spaces, whether they're national parks or Memorial Park. Who's going to pay the bill? So I think that a re-envisioning of this park to make for opportunities for children to get outside, and the great thing is because kids don't go outside very much, what's old to us is very exciting and new to them, because this is an unexplored. We got to remember that many of us have the opportunity and the resources to go to national parks or even international parks. For many of the children that I served at the Arboretum for 7 years and I serve today, this is like going to Africa for them. This is like going to the Congo or the rainforest. And so I think that we can build in opportunities for kids to learn not just about this particular place, but how it might be rooted to places where they've come from, specifically Latin America and migratory birds and how they make that physical connection. So it's both connections laterally to other park spaces, but also cultural bridges that this park space provides.
Thanks, Jaime. That was a great answer. That was fantastic. If we can switch gears for a moment to talk a little bit about the current management and logistics of the plan. This Seymour Lieberman Trail, Buffalo Bayou Demonstration Project, this long-range master plan, how do you manage them all without causing confusion?
That's a very fair question. I mean, the good news is we have a lot happening in the park. The challenge is managing what is happening in the park. So first, I'll start with one of them. The demonstration project you raised is not actually part of this project. It's not part of a conservancy project. However, it's an important possibility for Memorial Park and Buffalo Bayou. So how do we manage that? Well, we don't manage it, we input. But one of the things that we would ask Thomas and his team to do is to understand it, is to understand what's going to happen. Potentially we can influence it, but for the final plan that is coming forward or that will come forward, understand the implications and understand what, therefore, we need to think about for master planning. Regarding the other two pieces of the question, which were the master planning and the Seymour Lieberman Trail, how do we avoid confusion on those? Well, we actually have brought forward design possibilities for Seymour Lieberman Trail, accelerating that a bit ahead of the master plan, because we have the number that's always thrown around is 10,000 runners a day using that trail and tripping and falling and hurting themselves because it needs, not all of them, of course, but it happens daily. It needs upgrade. It needs to be addressed. We have a donor lined up who wants to move forward with it, and so we'll move forward in phases. We can move forward with the first phase with Thomas working and his team, working with the team that's Lauren Griffith and her folks, kind of planning that together. She's leading the charge on Seymour Lieberman, but in the work that she's doing, Thomas can incorporate the thinking and the work that they are doing, Thomas and his team. And then for future, it's kind of phased, Seymour Lieberman's phase. So for future phases of Seymour Lieberman, it would be incorporated right into the master plan. So they're not totally distinct efforts. They're connected efforts where we're sharing information. So it's really about, it kind of comes down to, you could ask the same question about the Arboretum and the Arboretum master planning and Memorial Park, the Conservancy associated master planning. What's the difference there? How do you work those two? The Arboretum is ahead of us in master planning, ahead of the rest of the park, and they're rolling forward, but they're sharing with us all the time. They've invited us and Thomas and his team to all of their sessions, and we're trying to figure out how we can leverage from each other and integrate to the best of our ability. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in and around the park all the time, and it's a matter of identifying it and sharing and planning together to the best of our ability.
One thing as an outsider that reassures me as the most recent person to the table here is that I was pleasantly surprised that there do not seem to be turf wars and boundaries between organizations. It's been really reassuring to find how much common ground between the Arboretum and Memorial Park there really is. And it's shared values. I think this community is really coming around the stewardship of the whole park in a wonderful way. So it gives me a lot of hope for a healthy collaboration moving forward.
Thanks, Thomas. This is a question kind of to the experts, and maybe if you've already considered, is there anything that can be done to reduce noise pollution from the surrounding roadway? And this kind of follows on to this. Where do the needs of the homeowners in Camp Logan fall in your list of priorities? Many of the amenities and increased traffic negatively affect people who live there. So it's kind of a noise and traffic issue.
Okay, well, I actually mentioned this to Thomas when we were standing in the doorway a moment ago, that several of you mentioned noise in your little round tables. One of the thoughts, other than a noise wall, because noise walls are very ugly and expensive, is to actually manage a thicket next to the roadways, and that can sometimes eliminate some of the noise. And that could actually be one of the management tools we look at.
I love it. Look at that. Quick answer.
What about the Camp Logan piece?
Camp Logan piece.
Oh, the Camp Logan. Camp Logan piece, which was many of the amenities and increased traffic negatively affect.
Here.
What was the question?
Okay. Where do the needs of the homeowners in Camp Logan fall in your list of priorities? Many of the amenities and increased traffic negatively affect the people who live there.
So I think, yeah, this is for me, Louis, don't worry, it's not yours.
That's not
it's a
old
different
Camp Logan.
question, right. I think, we have a number of members of neighborhoods, Crestwood, Camp Logan, that are very active and vocal and are beginning to identify, if they, maybe for a long time, have been identifying their needs. And that's part of, this is the time to think about those needs. This is the time to take those needs into consideration. This is the time to do our best to address those needs. Now, I can't say where they fall in terms of priority. We don't have, we haven't started planning. There aren't priorities at this point. But understanding what the needs are, understanding what the issues are, will allow us to think through how to address them. And you raised the thicket with respect to the freeway noise, for example. I was discussing with the Simmons the other day the possibility of perhaps we could create a thicket along or a buffer zone of some sort, along their neighborhood as well. Camp Logan, Crestwood, it's a potential. These are the kind of ideas that we'd like to surface. To surface the ideas, we need to know what the issues are and what the negative things you're facing are, and that's what we're starting to learn. Again, I encourage you to fill out the survey that we have, all of you in this room and all your friends, for things that you want and things that are bothering you in the park, and that's the only way that we'll have to know what to address. And I don't know, Thomas, did you have anything else?
Another one, what can be done to preserve the hilly running trails near the bayou? Erosion is a problem there, and keeping the remote feeling of the trails through the trees. Don't everybody speak at once.
I don't know how to answer the question. It's part of planning to me. It's part of identifying the needs and identifying the issues like I just described, but then applying a technical and ecologically sound solution to those. And so it's bringing the folks, and I know Thomas and his team have experience in trail creation and trail management. It's two issues. It's trail creation, and then it's trail management and usage management. And part of what we want to do in our planning process is consider maintenance, consider management, and do the best we can with that. So if we're raising funds for, let's say, trails, we're not just raising funds to build the trails, we're raising funds at the same time to manage, maintain the trails, or perhaps we don't build or create them at all, using that example. But I don't know, I hope that answers the question.
Trails, and particularly the running track, when we first started running 30 years ago, was a mulch, a redwood. You come home with red on your, but it was spongy. And I think the Arboretum had those kinds of trails at first. And it seemed like it was ecologically amenable.
And I think, those are the specific kinds of trails that we put where, that would be something that we consider in the whole context of the master plan, and what materials we use, what's most ecologically friendly, and what's most, what can we maintain the most easily and affordably.
I think the specific question was about the trails along the bayou, correct? Okay, now I'm going to step in it and I'll be unemployed come, next week. The truth of the matter is the different user groups have to quit pointing the fingers at each other. You've got bicycle riders in here who are blaming runners. You have runners who are blaming bike riders. You have guys walking their dogs back there on or off the leash. And I guarantee you there was a member of every one of those groups on those trails this last Saturday when the trails were closed. It's because they were wet. We've had 6 inches of rain, and it was drizzling, and et cetera. The gates were locked. And I'm not saying that there's not a use for all of those groups. I mean, what do you think I do here? You know, I don't just come here to mow grass and pick up trash. I love this place. But you've got to quit pointing the fingers at each other. The only way those trails back there are maintained are by volunteers. There's not park staff to do that. You know, groups have to respect the fact that some of the trails that they're wanting to use are not supposed to be trails at all. You know, that in the agreements that were made 10 or 15 years ago, they were closed. And yet when we go and close them, somebody comes back and reopens them. It's not park staff. We're trying to stay out of back there in the first place. So, you know, to manage them going forward, somebody has to take ownership. I mean, it's been bike riders in the past. It's been trail runners in the past. So, okay.
The next question is the last question, and this is going to go to Shelley. Wasn't there a actually it goes to Shelley, but Thomas can follow it up. Wasn't there a master plan for the park before? What happened, and how will you use it?
Hello. There have been a number of master plans for Memorial Park. What happened, the most recent one being, it was finished and approved in 2004. Circumstances change. Circumstances change throughout time, which necessitates a new master plan. The circumstances, for example, that have changed between 2004 and now have been a number of disruptions in the park, ranging from, we all know about the drought, but then there was Hurricane Ike that set the pine trees up for beetle infestation. Then there was the drought. We have accelerated use of the park, which sets us up for overuse and wear and tear of maintenance. I mean, on the amenities in the park. We have declining city budgets for parks. That's a big change. And then on this front, and then we have issues that we just can't continue with it, that we haven't ever addressed, such as erosion and infrastructure. The document that was created for the last master plan was really a conservation-focused document. We'll build on top of that. The NBW team has that document. They've studied it carefully, and we will build on top of the principles of that document, but it really wasn't enough for where we are now. We also have a positive development, and that is the availability of the funding thanks to Uptown Houston and the leadership that they're bringing to the table, the strong leadership they're bringing to the table that will help us achieve what we're trying to achieve in the park. And so that's, the others I'd say are a little bit negative, but that's a really good part of the story, and the creativity of Houston leadership in getting us to this point.
Yeah, to address the WRT master plan, and how we will use it, I think folks are, in general, all over the country, careless a little bit with the term master plan, or maybe it needs qualifiers. I like to think of the planning process as, if anybody here is old enough to know what it was like to use a camera, and you look through a lens and it's completely out of focus, and you start to bring it into focus, and you can start to see shapes and forms and lines, and you kind of understand a composition, and you go further and further and further. I would say the WRT master plan did things like say, recreation should hold to the north areas, conservation and ecological restoration to the southern areas. So that's a big, foggy recommendation, but a logical and helpful recommendation. And I feel like our goal is to bring these kinds of recommendations into very, very crisp and fine focus so that we have a real project that can get built at the end of this process, so that we could take this master plan and start to select walkways, trails, restoration projects, prairie projects, and start to really make them come true. So in my mind, it's about bringing a sharper focus.
Well, on that note, and because it's time to go, if the experts want to move their heads real quick, I'm going to I'm putting up here the website we are entreating you, we are asking you very strongly, please to go to this website. The images that you saw throughout this presentation were taken at workshops. We did at Lamar workshop, at Lamar High School, that we've done with educators, that we've done with user groups. So you see these people in the room at these other open houses, but they're not the entirety of the people that we're working with. So we are getting young voices, we are getting different voices. So just to reassure you, please do go to this website. We need your input. Send it out to all of your friends. And I'm going to leave it to Shelley to say.
Just thank you to Lord Consulting for doing such a fabulous job leading us through the public input process. We're spending $100,000 just on public input. We're taking this very seriously. To NBW as well for the masterful work that they're doing at this point, listening and studying and refraining from designing for 6 months. And I also wanted to thank the folks that really helped us initiate this master planning process. Jim Porter, who is our chair, he was here earlier this evening, and Chris Knapp, who is the chair of the Long Range Master Planning Committee for Memorial Park Conservancy, started this process over 1.5 years ago based on the needs that I described, that they were observing, that others had observed. So thank you for bringing us up to this point. And thank you all for hanging in there with us tonight. Please share your ideas. We didn't get to all your questions, but they will go on our website. The answers, we'll start answering them next week. And so continue to share questions, continue to share thoughts. And if you have resources, ideas for us, please let us know that. Take these little squares that Joy is holding up so you remember to go and fill out our survey. That's really important for you to get what you want considered. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great evening.